Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. As we are sitting here, we are in a way the embodiment of the modern university. As a community of students and scholars in the company of partners, we represent both the private and the public domain. And with regard to the latter, I'm glad to be in a company today of two dear colleagues, Dr. Michael Stukrath and Mr. Bambang Sudibyo. And I'm very happy, Mr. Sudibyo, that you're here, that you brought your wife with you, and all your colleagues from the universities in Indonesia. Some of them I met already when I was in Indonesia, and it's very nice to have an opportunity to reinforce our cooperation. Thank you. Yes, please. But Mr. Sudibyo, you as well as you, Mr. Stukrath, you both have very strong ties with this university. The first, you as a good neighbor, because you are a good neighbor, and you, Mr. Sudibyo, especially because you have the relationship with Maastricht's medical faculty, and I hope our presence here will be perceived as a sign of the interest that the three of us have in the scientific community as such, and of course in the University of Maastricht as part of that community. Thank you, dear Jo, for your invitation. I would also like to thank you for your outspoken statements regarding the role you want to fulfill, to be of service to society in the domain of knowledge and innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a worthy university tradition to look into the future at the opening of the academic year, and that's what I would like to do presently. But first, I would like to take you into the past, back 30 years to 1976, to be precise. What was happening then? Let's have a look at some of the news headlines there were in 1976. The illustrious Den Uyl cabinet entered its fourth year. The supersonic Concorde made its first commercial flight. We experienced a rare, hot, bone-dry summer, which saw meteorological records one after another broken, and Dries van Agt became the first leader of the new CDA party. And afterwards, he addressed the following words to the conference: "The CDA will not bow to either the left or the right, and will not allow itself to be designated as a buffer between the left and the right." You know this? In the United States, Jimmy Carter was elected president, and just around the corner from where we are today, in the Basilica of St. Servatius, the University of Maastricht was officially opened, at the time still under the name the University of Limburg, with the legendary Zheng Tans at the helm. At that time, I was a member of the Maastricht Local Council, and I still remember those glorious days very well. A new medical faculty was considered to be urgently needed at the time, because in the second half of the 60s, the existing 7 medical schools could no longer accommodate all the prospective medical students. And the fact that such a faculty was established in Maastricht was directly related to the closure of the coal mines. Limburg was badly hit economically by these closures, and the university had to become one of the new economic drivers in the region. Well, from the outset, everyone agreed that Maastricht had to mean more to the university community of the Netherlands than extra study places alone. And those taking the initiative therefore opted for a new and, for its time, revolutionary educational system, problem-based learning. And this was something completely different to the traditional one-way transfer of knowledge through formal lectures. And it's no wonder that initially the university community regarded Maastricht with a degree of suspicion. Is it going to work down there in the deep south? Yes. And however, Maastricht quickly cut the ground out from under the feet of the skeptics by delivering excellent results. Maastricht University is still doing well, and in so doing you are making a significant contribution to the government's efforts to provide half the Dutch population with higher education by 2020. And by definition, a more highly educated population means economic growth. And this growth is determined by labor productivity and labor force participation. Labor productivity increases because more highly educated people are able to perform more complex work and can develop new technologies, which in turn benefits labor productivity. And moreover, those with a higher education participate to a greater degree in the labor process than those who are less highly educated. And this will lead to a rise in the income per capita of the Dutch population that the Netherlands Bureau for Economic Policy Analysis estimates at between 4 and 7% in the long run. Economic growth also means more jobs, and these are more than welcome in Limburg, where the development of employment opportunities still gives cause for great concern. In addition to the relationship between education and economic growth, there is also a relationship between education and social benefits. People with a higher education are healthier, less inclined to criminal activity, less dependent on social security, and are socially more active as members of clubs and associations, among other things. And finally, they participate more often in the democratic process and in cultural activities. The ambition of providing 50% of the population with a higher education therefore has social motives as well, and perhaps these weigh more heavily in the balance. After all, raising the level of education isn't an objective in itself. The ultimate goal is a better functioning, more cohesive society and increased prosperity and well-being. The expectation is that in 2011, 50% of those born in 1988 will be enrolled in higher education programs. So this will be the first generation that seems likely to achieve the goal of 30%. In comparison, last year, 31% of our population had a higher education. And this figure places us in the middle compared to our neighbors. It's higher than the figures for Germany, Austria, France and Italy, but lower than those for Belgium, England, Denmark, Sweden and Finland. But just like us, all these countries are trying to make up ground as well, so we have to move forward swiftly. And this is not, of course, a competition with us against the rest of Europe. On the contrary, what we want to do is to encourage European universities to open their doors to students from across the whole of Europe, encourage Dutch students to cross borders and vice versa. And in recent years, important steps have been made to improve this in terms of structure, the 3 cycles, and the possibility of measuring both the quality and quantity of programs throughout Europe. And although striving for excellence and diversity in a Europe context is sometimes clearly frustrated by financial and legal restraints, and I would like to encourage you to stay right on top of that, because you mentioned there's just one thing you have to keep in mind, is Maastricht on top. Well, stay there. And like many of my colleagues, I'm well aware of the vital role you play in creating that Europe state of mind we long for, and I assure you, you will be heard. Maastricht already has the highest percentage of international students in Europe, so even though there are still some barriers to be broken down, you are already doing extremely well in this regard too. Dutch universities rate reasonably well on international lists like the Times Higher Education League table. There's Delft University of Technology, it's on the 53. We have the Shanghai list, there we find Utrecht on 41. And if you have the Webometrics directory, we find the University of Amsterdam on 21. But these are certainly not top positions. So our universities are facing a real challenge. Even more so given that the higher education market is internationalizing, and in the long run, Dutch institutions could miss the boat. Well, seen from the other side, however, we should not overly dramatize our mediocre positions. After all, these studies do not take differences in resources into consideration. And moreover, the results are colored by an exaggerated focus on institutions in the English-speaking world. If we only look at Europe, the Netherlands' performance is excellent. There are 3,000 universities in Europe and only 14 in the Netherlands. And yet between 4 and 8 of our universities are listed in the European top 40, and this includes Maastricht, assessed by German employers as one of the best 8 universities in the world. So, herzlichen Dank. Despite the fact that it's not always clear which experts assess the universities or what criteria they use, our humble position on international ranking lists could begin to lead a life of their own. And there is a danger that prospective students will be guided by the lists, or more correctly put, misguided. So for this reason, we should, wherever possible, try to raise a few places by putting good results under the spotlight. And this is nothing for us to be ashamed about. Our characteristic Dutch modesty may seem most virtuous, but as the German poet Wilhelm Busch once said, Bescheidenheit ist eine Zier, doch weiter kommt man ohne ihr. We have recorded successes, and everyone should, no, everyone must be told about these. So let your voice be heard, and as far as I am concerned, shout it from the university rooftops. 5 young Dutch scientists have each been awarded an ESF grant of 1.2 million euro. Proof that the European scientific community has every faith in the talents of these young researchers. The European Young Investigators Prizes are awarded to brilliant minds of whom it is expected that they will become future leaders in their fields. And of the 25 ESF grants awarded, 5 went to the Netherlands. We can be rightly proud of this fact, and yet this wasn't front-page news in our national dailies, let alone world news. A missed opportunity. It can, and I think it should have been handled better. It's a challenging task for our communications experts, I believe. Apart from several individual successes, the average Dutch students, I have to say, lacks the ambition to excel. According to research, only a small minority of students can be characterized as driven, in the sense of being highly motivated and committed, dedicated, making good progress in their studies and devoting sufficient time to studying. Too many good time Charlies and not enough go-getters. It's not for nothing that my former State Secretary Mark Rutte mentioned Begeisterung in this regard. Where is the drive to excel? The fiery passion? I'm convinced that our students have more potential than we are seeing fulfilled. So I challenge the universities to awaken the latent ambitions of their students by further expanding their contact with pre-university schools, for example, by laying down challenges to students early on, by encouraging them and stimulating them, by deepening their knowledge and preparing them well for practicing a profession, by harmonizing programs to the specific capacities and needs of the students, by taking into account their previously acquired competences and work experience, by offering honors programs to talented students, by paying attention to the students, by taking their questions seriously, and last but not least, by involving students in research. Because education and research are inextricably bound together. An optimum combination of the two is the basis for an excellent research reputation and for producing and attracting excellent students. Ladies and gentlemen, this 50% target entails a high risk, and that's the risk of a high number of dropouts. We are all rightly concerned about the figure of almost 25% of students who leave school prematurely. Young people who leave secondary schools and senior secondary vocational schools without any basic qualification. Luckily, a percentage does return to school, so that ultimately 87% of our 18 to 24-year-olds have at least a basic qualification. but the figures for academic higher education are far more dramatic. For this sector, after 7 years, and that's longer than the norm, only some 60% of students have obtained a degree. And of the remaining 40%, more than half are still studying, and the rest have dropped out for good. Dropping out is frustrating, of course, for teachers and students, and it has an adverse impact on society too, because potential knowledge workers are lost. And moreover, over a period of about 2.5 years, it cost the state, so you, taxpayers, about 370 million euro. After 6 years, the yield of Dutch universities stagnates at 41%, but Maastricht reached 58%. Compliments. With 74%, the medical faculty scores the highest, and language and culture the lowest with 34%. Yes, it's true. This is in line with the figures for the rest of the country, but we have to do better here in Maastricht as well. Whichever way you look at it, achieving the target of having 50% of the population with a higher education is feasible within the set time frame, if we have the courage to implement unorthodox reforms. So I agree fully with you on this. It's high time to implement a binding recommendation regarding the next step in a person's education. And in addition, we could progress to admission selection, tuition fee differentiation, and a more open system. I can't do this anymore because there will be elections on the 22nd of November. But a future cabinet will have to make more far-reaching decisions in these areas. And furthermore, a future cabinet will have to decide on using public or private funds. And that's a tricky question, but one that needs to be addressed. Because in Europe, just like in the United States, the state invests about 1.2% of the gross domestic product in higher education. In the Netherlands, we invest slightly more than the Americans with 1.3%, but American universities receive an additional 1.4% from private financing. And you can do a lot with that kind of money. However, a warning would not go amiss. We must not replace public funding with private funding. What we need is additional funding. Ladies and gentlemen, in this speech I would like to ask for special attention for students from ethnic minorities. They too need to be encouraged to develop themselves to the highest possible level, especially since a growing proportion of the working population has ethnic minority origins. And on the national level, the participation of Turkish and Moroccan students has more than doubled in the last 10 years. But unfortunately, ethnic minorities also have the highest dropout rate. If more young people from ethnic minorities were to follow higher education courses successfully, it wouldn't only be a better use of ethnic minority talent, but it would also deliver new role models for ethnic minority youth to follow. And I mentioned earlier that Maastricht has the highest percentage of foreign students in Europe. And this international student population led to Maastricht becoming a forerunner in organizing activities aimed at encouraging the integration of different cultures. So you can see that internationalization leads to diversity, and that policies aimed at making everyone feel at home also have a beneficial effect on students from ethnic minorities. And with the new Bridging the Gap plan that will run until 2008, Maastricht continues to encourage the intake and transfer of international and ethnic minority students. And as I understand it, by, among other things, developing customized individual entrance routes, and I believe this is an exciting development that I will follow closely, of course. I would also like to talk separately about the position of women at the university. I saw you entering this theater, and I started counting, but not 2 hands, So I think there's a lot to be done. And if we look at students, emancipation seems to have been a complete success. Just as many young women are studying as young men, and on the average, the women are performing even better than the men. In terms of PhD candidates, we match the European average. However, when it comes to climbing the academic ladder, more and more women are left behind, and this is most clearly illustrated if we look at executive boards and see that women make up a mere 6% of the members. Why? I can think of a number of reasons. Maybe it has something to do with the culture in the Netherlands. Just one example. Can you imagine a selection committee for a university position asking a male candidate if he plans to have children in the future? No. Well, female candidates are asked such questions, usually in a furtive manner. They're smart, but it does happen. And it's also a fact that many women work part-time. And no wonder, it's encouraged in the Netherlands. However, if you work less than 80%, you have virtually no chance of progressing to a higher position. There is some cold comfort. That doesn't only happen in the academic world. Emancipation goals are not being met in managerial positions, top civil service posts, mayors, and let's not forget ministerial posts. So I'm pleased that in Maastricht people are reluctant to accept the disadvantaged position of women. After all, Maastricht is my town, and the Equal project, breaking down the gender barrier at universities, was developed here under the direction of the Center for Gender and Diversity, and it supports the intake of women at universities in all manner of ways. We can, however, still move up a gear. Take Groningen as an example. The intention there is to double the number of female professors to reach 20%, and the challenge for Maastricht is to show that the southernmost university in the Netherlands can end up higher than Groningen. And now I have to say it in Dutch. Gaat nog iets boven Groningen. Up till now, I've mainly been speaking about the social duty task of universities, civil task as far as education is concerned. But universities also have to contribute to innovation through fundamental research. And to this end, universities need to be allowed all the room and opportunities they need without too much interference from the business community and the government. Maybe you read what Ronald Plasterk said about it. He had some very sensible things to say. For example, every study on innovation has shown that the government can make one contribution in particular to create and support a long tradition of excellent fundamental research. An example is what happened in physics in Leiden a century ago, when Nobel Prizes were awarded to the school that had grown up around Lorentz. The value of such a tradition isn't only that it generates knowledge, which spreads of itself quite quickly across the globe and only contributes slightly to local innovation, but mainly that you can educate students in a tradition of excellency. And I would now like to leave Ronald Plasterk's word and his article that was published in the Volkskrant National Daily on the 30th of June 2006 by saying that I am in complete agreement with him on this point. And like him, I think it's time that universities take into consideration the areas in which the Netherlands wishes to be economically strong, but fundamental research may never be completely focused on a desired economic effect. Because that would mean an academic straitjacket, a restriction of freedom of thought and action, death at birth for the creative thought processes within fundamental research. In recent years, we have done a lot of work on research policy, for example, by setting priorities, genomics, ICT, nanotechnology. With the smart mix, we are encouraging excellent research groups and the creation of value, and moreover, we have made a portion of direct government funding dependent on the performances of the institutions in indirect funding and funds obtained through contract research. We have, however, noticed that we have reached the limits of performance-based funding. And the Advisory Council for Science and Technology, the ABT, They sketched a striking picture of the scientific landscape in the Netherlands, a plateau with few valleys, but with very few mountain peaks as well. We need more high points, and we have to select more priorities. Both the Chang Committee and the ABT indicated that extra funds would be necessary in this respect. I can't promise you this now, it's something for the next cabinet. However, as I said earlier during the presentation of the NWO plans, I find it hard to imagine that a future cabinet would not continue with investing extra funds in research. This needs to be done under one stringent condition, that there is clarity regarding expenditure. Transparency is the key word, and the universities must, of course, dare to choose the strongest research groups, to choose for quality. A taste of quality. That's today's theme, and we will have every opportunity to sample your quality here. I'm very curious about that, just like I am curious about the quality of the coming academic year. So let's make a swift start. I began this speech by making a jump into the past. Let's now take a leap towards the future. Thank you for your attention.